Welcome to another edition of Let's Build HubSpot Websites with Anton. Happy Tuesday, Anton. How you doing, man?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Having way too
Awesome.
much fun over here with AI tools and new developer platforms. But we like to keep it real and
Yeah.
honest here on all these shows because these things are only valuable if you know how to use them, when to use them, uh, what you can actually do as an outcome. And this is me trying real hard to segue into our topic that is, you know, in lots of places, Europe especially, there's rules about how we do stuff, how we serve up customer experiences. And you mentioned this morning there's a new web law coming in Europe
Yeah.
next year, which will affect almost every business website. Tell me more.
Yes. So it's a Europe law or a European law, and especially I would say in Germany. So the whole law is to create, I would say, some sort of baseline for website experiences. So just the very, very basic outline of the whole law is every website has to achieve some sort of accessibility. So if you're not familiar with accessibility in web, there's a thing that's called WCAG, so WCAG guidelines. And there are a few different, I would say, steps in it. So, for instance, there's a so-called double A guideline. Mm, and if we take a look on an example, so for the double A guideline, a video has to have subtitles. So pretty basic, right? And for the triple A guideline, the user has to have options to select between different stylings in those subtitles. So maybe you've noticed that maybe on some other video platform or streaming service that if you select subtitles, some of them are already offering like, hey, do you want white text on black background? Do you want to have yellow text on black background? Do you want to have black text on yellow background? Like those kind of settings. And this is a very specific example, but to make it more applicable, I would say the whole law will mostly affect businesses in terms of corporate design, in my opinion, because most or a lot of websites that are out there, maybe they're old, maybe they were done by a not so professional person. Let's put it that way. And I mean, I've encountered or I came across a lot of websites in the past, and it's not that uncommon that it's more like, okay, we need a button, and we actually don't care or we don't understand or don't have the experience on should the button be blue or green, maybe yellow, we don't know. We need a button, and this is the most important thing. How the button looks, we don't care, right? And I mean, from a designer's perspective, there was a time, I would say, mm, where you design things to look good and you did not thought about, yeah, but what is the color contrast and is it high enough or something like that? You as a designer, your job was, and I would say mostly is, still to make things look great, right? And designers might not think about color contrasts, size ratios, all those things, because to be honest, it's not always their job, right? So
Right.
there are designers and there are designers. Like there's a
Well,
lot
yeah,
in between.
it's like what are we designing for, right? And
Exactly.
even as you mentioned, like uh, the primary goal functionally of a designer
Mhm.
is to make things look and feel great.
Yeah,
Um, but for who, right? And
exactly.
that's where it can be definitely just internal at the table. That's why website goals, we just keep hammering, what is your website supposed to be doing?
Yeah,
Like, and if you want people using it, it needs to look great for them. And these new guidelines are very interesting for me to hear about because they exist because people suck at websites. Like in
yeah,
a lot of cases, because like it might look great for you, but for somebody who's colorblind, they can't read
yeah,
anything because there's not enough contrast and there's all these other things going on. Um, and when you don't build that in, like it can be very hard to get there. That's why all these other tools and plugins and apps exist, to help you do that. But that's where it's like, is it getting in the way of function? That happens all the time. And it doesn't matter how nice it looks, like if nobody's able to use it. That's where, like, when you get in these modes and so many of these websites that you mentioned, it's just like, oh, we just need to get a business website up. We just need to be able to show that we're real. Like, here's our products, here's our catalog, but everybody's just going to come to us and then we'll have the conversation and then, right? But then we start doing other things like, oh, let's get serious about social. And we'll start to share links there. And now nothing is optimized for mobile because we didn't take that into account.
yeah.
Um, but that subtitle thing is so interesting
Hmm.
from a perspective of like I'm excited that I can do it myself easily in
Yeah,
Riverside as an internal like process post production to be able to allow a user on a
yeah.
website to manage that from like that. There's a lot of work involved. Like that doesn't just happen with the click of a button, right?
I would say for the user, like if we gonna rewatch this recording later, well, we are the users, right? So for us, the users, it's just a simple click of a button. For the developers who are building Riverside, where we are streaming from, it's a bit more than just, yeah, okay, let's add in a select option, something. And just a side note, fun fact, whatever you want to call it, uh, this is why Facebook is blue. So if you're not familiar, Mark Zuckerberg has a red-green weakness, and this is why he decided to make Facebook blue, because blue is a color that most people can recognize. And yeah, so fun fact by this side. And in terms of HubSpot accessibility, color blindness, I would say accessibility is a huge topic. And there are tools out there already that you can install and provide the user just the same options, like increase font sizes, increase contrasts, increase XYZ. Something that I've seen in the past was also some sort of AMP. So for those who might not be familiar with AMP, it's a feature from Google which was developed. I'm not sure if this is still a thing, but AMP is or was a thing that would rewrite the whole website on mobile because it was designed for mobile. And it was displaying only text. So no images, only text, headlines, like to increase the performance, but also white background, black black text. So the highest possible ratio of contrast. And I've seen a feature on a website recently where you could disable all the images. So, I mean, you could technically debate about, okay, this is also an accessibility feature because images and video, especially, can be seen as a um, distraction thing. And I would assume that there are people out there using the web who are like, oh, an image, great. I will look at the image for 5 minutes and will ignore the whole text, right? Or the video. The video is more important than the text, which is somewhat correct. But when we are speaking about marketing or RevOps or HubSpot in general, you want to provide um, a great user experience and great content with a high uh, lead count, right? So lead conversion. Mm, so therefore, you could think about offering your website users an option to disable all images and basically rebuild or provide an amp like experience from a developer's perspective. It's nothing that can be done in, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes. So a developer can develop code that, how should I say it, would automatically rewrite all the or the whole page because it's not just disable all the CSS because then your website will look like from the early 90s.
Yeah,
But like back to the main focus, right? And yeah,
yeah. No, I think you mentioned like corporate um, stylings and
yeah.
things before, and it's like, oh, so much of the conversation, especially when moving to HubSpot websites from
Mm,
anywhere else, is like
yeah.
the amount of control that people think they need or want in relationship to either empowering others to manage brand guidelines or restricting them, right? When you get to a situation, especially like with the subtitles things, and like
Yeah.
if the user can change colors and fonts and 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 all these things that you just put so much time into developing the exact experience that you wanted, like should we even be putting that much time into that piece anymore when somebody can just change the font or change the color scheme, or they might be using dark mode, and now that color scheme doesn't make any sense. Like that's one of my favorite things to see. Like
Yeah.
if I get an email from somebody, I can tell whether they know dark mode exists or not
Hmm.
because I'm always in dark mode and I will see a big
Yeah.
white box logo like wherever it exists, right? But that's the, I
Hmm.
mean, dark mode might be the biggest one. Like if your brand stylings like do not work in dark mode, like that should be a big deal for you right now.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
but I think
Yes.
that's probably that might be the most like obvious example that everybody has already experienced or
Hmm.
knows exists in terms of like managing accessibility or managing just UX is how many websites, how many services uh, have we used over the years, and within the last 2 years almost all of them have like dark mode options now,
Yeah.
right? To the point where it was fun with Nico on Sunday using Replit. Like he didn't even ask for it, but the first iteration of the
Hmm.
result had light mode, dark mode like optioning in
Nice.
it, right?
Yeah.
It's like
I
built
mean,
in.
dark mode is a huge thing, and not just for developers, right? Um, and I would say it's somewhat becoming a default. Let's call it default, right? Mm, because there are people out there. I would say, um, I, for myself, if there's an option for a dark mode, this is the first thing that I will change because I'm a dark mode user. And I mean, it's also for accessibility because uh, a dark mode is much better for the eyes. So you don't have to uh, put a lot of, yeah, how should I say it, work or stress on your eyes, and therefore your eyes are a bit safer. And also, I think that in dark mode, if implemented correctly, always or almost every website will look better than in light mode. Just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
And
And just like
therefore,
to put it in perspective, I think this is a good like so some a lot of times my lighting is coming from right? So you can see this kind of like whitewash happen. That's only the monitor, right? And now if I go full screen, I've never tested this before, so hopefully it works, but right, like you could see a
yeah.
change when I expanded my Slack instance to full screen, which my Slack instance, I have selected dark mode.
Hmm.
And it can be jarring now when other people are sharing their screen and they're showing you like Slack or LinkedIn or whatever, and they're not in
Yeah.
dark mode. And you're like, whoa, what is this application? I don't even
Yeah.
recognize this thing anymore. But that's where it's when we've got this stuff up all day, like maybe instead of creating all this other equipment like blue light glasses and like all like that was like the first iteration of protection. Like instead of designing
Yeah,
a better experience, right? We just created these other things that would, you know,
yeah.
help us. But that's again,
I
dark
mean,
mode is just one significant example. And this is where when regulations are out there to, often protect users uh, and if the white like all of the things that we hear about of being exposed to this stuff too much on a daily basis and the problems it can cause later, this is why we have these kinds of regulations that's like, look,
yeah,
um, your website needs to be able to operate, in this way if you want, people to be coming and, doing business with you and learning from you, all the things a website could be doing. Um, so what, like, is there anything we haven't hit on? Or help me with this, like the AAA, double A,
yeah.
like what does that mean?
So there are different guidelines, right? And it always depends on how much time do you as a business want to invest into meeting those guidelines. So there's an A standard or guideline, which is the lowest thing, I would say. Then there's the double A and the triple A. Like if you're familiar with games or movies, you often heard or hear like, yeah, this is a triple A movie, like a huge thing, right? And in games, the same, like, hey, just to name an example, the Assassin's Creed series counts like a triple A series. I mean, personal opinions, but by the side, there were great titles in the Assassin's Creed series. Uh, and on the other hand, there are maybe some indie developers who just don't have the manpower to put or to create such a triple A game, but the games are still great. And returning to the accessibility guidelines, so there is the A, double A, and triple A. And if let's say, let me just Google for a color contrast checker just online, and we and let's put up just the first one. So if I
And that's
uh,
an interesting analogy, and I figured that's where you'd
yeah,
be going anyways,
hmm,
because so many of the regulations are like check all these boxes, right? And you're
yeah,
at this level or this level or this level. Like they could be AAA
hmm,
and just check all the boxes really badly and still
yeah,
be a bad experience. Uh, it'll still be it'll still be a better experience on some sites just because inherently this stuff makes it better, but it doesn't mean like, when it comes to the flow of information and how you move through the website and all that stuff, right? Uh,
hmm,
you know, so so at some point you gotta like think about like, okay, the designation isn't everything. Um, but it should help you start. Like, okay, there's been
yeah,
some amount of effort and resources, and they at least know what the regulation is, like if they have these
hmm,
different classifications, right?
yeah. So I mean, I can uh, just go here and let's take a look at this website, which is for me the first website that popped up when I typed in color contrast checker. So for instance, we have a white background and a blue, which is something like a default link color. And the contrast ratio is 8.59 to 1. And when we scroll down, we see it will pass the AA and AAA guideline for normal text, for large text, and some text inputs as a border color. And if we decide to do something like uh, gray, so dark gray, right, almost black,
Right.
mm, we will see, hey, the color contrast is 1.47 to 1, and it will fail all the tests because a user hardly can read this text, right?
Yep.
And on the other hand, if we decide to do it like uh, green, will pass again because this green has an extreme amount of contrast to the background.
Yep.
I'm not saying that this is a great color combination, but just to outline how this works. And uh, if we just say, okay, let's go to red, then it will pass only two things, right? So for large text, I mean, I would assume that we both will agree that this example is not a big text, right? But for
Right.
this website, it's a big text. Mm,
Oh,
and
this is a great example of tools that are
yeah,
available to help people get this done.
yeah,
And like, so when we say things like it's the hardest part is the decision
yeah,
to do it, right? And knowing that
yeah,
sometimes the regulations are forcing you to make that decision, but you have all the tools and resources in available than ever before, right? Especially I imagine once you start asking AI for help, with this stuff where it's just like pick a color combination, right?
mhm,
Uh, and like the tools are there. So it's
yeah,
not like a rocket science or if it is, the tools are there to help make it not rocket science to understand, okay, this is why you shouldn't use those two colors, right? And
yeah,
when you can go to those tools yourselves, right? Obviously, um, not trying to remove any designers from the process, because there's still a lot of value in understanding, okay, this color, like that checker is not probably going to talk about like emotions and,
no,
color meanings and things like
yeah,
that. So then you can focus on that piece with any designer and have some color combinations ready to go, knowing that like, hey, here's what I want to use. I've already checked from a contrast perspective, like help us refine from there. Like, because this is the hard part when you don't want to do it yourself, right? When
mhm,
you have access to a tool like this, like it's going to always be more efficient for you to be able to go to a tool like that and play, right?
yeah,
Like Anton was just doing. I really like this color, but it's not working with this color. Okay, how can I start to tweak these up and down, right?
yeah,
To get to something I like that's also accessible, especially when we're working with founders and
yeah,
CEOs and the people that feel really strongly about the colors that they want to use.
yeah,
They need to be the ones in those tools like playing, like, and that's where if you so don't just go up to the CEO and say, okay, we got a new regulation to follow, we have to change it, we have to redo all of our designs, and then sit in a bunch of meetings. It's like, hey, like, here's this very easy to tool, can I get tool to use, can I get your help adjusting our color scheme, because ultimately you're the
mhm,
founder, and there's a great story behind this original color scheme, we don't want to lose that, but how can we comply, right?
yeah. I mean, there are so many tools out there. I even built a HubSpot module with this contrast checker a few years ago. So if you want to basically implement a feature like this. This is a HubSpot module that I've built 2 years ago. So basically it does exactly the same. You have a foreground color, you have a background color, and then you can click on calculate and it will show you like, hey, you will pass the double A, you will pass the triple A based on that, right? And if we let's just make an exam test because I don't remember what I have put in here. Yeah,
Oh,
so it will fail on this, and if we say it's come on, so it's this, and we will say it's black. Yeah, like this will pass, and
okay. And this is
yeah,
like just a great example. So often we get
yeah.
upset when regulations force us to do things. Um, most of the time, we've had access to very accessible tool sets that will have
Hmm.
allowed us to make our websites accessible
Yeah,
in this case. Business leaders have chosen not to do that. So it's not like out of nowhere. We've given you 10 years to try and figure
hmm
this out. You haven't, so here comes regulation,
yeah,
right? Like, and
exactly.
and that's where we are. And not to mention, most of the time, especially regulations like this one, they force you to make a better website. Like, so
Yes.
so don't get mad about it. Um, but no, like it's coming. Um, if it's not already here yet in some spots, you gotta do this. You gotta do
Hmm.
this stuff. And there's a lot in general. I find that the regulation, maybe there's some risk to not following that, but usually there's some other business risk where if you're choosing not to build your website, in this way to follow these guidelines, like how much conversion are you missing? How many people are you pissing off and not creating great experiences for? Like that is such a bigger risk, you know,
Yeah.
most of the time. Um, so yeah, and this is why we're talking about this stuff. Is there anything in this regulation that you think is going to be, just outside of strategically, I think, like, what is going to be the hardest thing for people to um, comply with, you think?
Good question. I would say that colors and font sizes will be the hardest because quite often it's like, okay, we have our primary color, maybe a secondary color, and that's it, right? And nobody thinks about the shades. So, for instance, let me put up this website, which I also use quite frankly. Mm, so, for instance, we have, let's say, a red color, right? So we have this one, and we might have, let's say, a blue one. So this one. But you don't think about all the different shades,
Hmm.
right? And nobody needs to use black. This is something that you don't need. But again, this is so color and text combination, I would say will be the hardest for everybody to implement because this will have a major impact on your website. And I would say that a lot of website owners will face the fact that they have to redo the website. And if it's written in a not so great way, then this could mean that a website relaunch is right in front of your door, right? And
Yeah. And
yeah, it
generally,
can be something.
if it happens in Europe, it'll
Yeah.
happen in California and Canada next, and like the
Mm,
same cycle. I mean, maybe the next 4 years will be different a little bit. We
yeah.
won't talk about that. But it's
Hmm.
um, like, and I bet we all have baggage related to this. Like when you brought up font sizes, I was
Oh yeah.
reminded, like when uh, first of all, these corporate environments where there is just like a stranglehold on what the
Yeah.
brand guidelines are, and especially in the transition of COVID, like where
Hmm.
so many brand guidelines were built for printed materials,
Yeah.
and then we're supposed to follow the same on a
Hmm.
website. And even though I try to build a website, and I understand that when I pull a website up, 14 font is not legible. Like it just
No.
wasn't. And I had to go through multiple iterations of conversations where it's like, no, this is at 16 and 18 because I need people to read it. Like
Yeah.
following your 14-point font guideline makes zero sense because, like, look at it. And that's where, again, you can't
This
even have these
is
conversations where it's like, look at it. Oh, I can't read it, but that's the
yeah.
guideline.
This is a great thing that you've mentioned because sometimes people just, especially if they're not designers, they're mixing up points and pixels because print is in PT, so points, and most web design happens in pixels. So if you're designing or if you're writing something in Word, you're putting it in 12, but 12 points. This is something that Word, I think, doesn't even show. I'm not sure, but it will only show 12, right? And this is legible, but 12 points equals 16 pixels. If I'm or even 18, I'm not sure, but something like that. And I, I mean, I'm just looking at my very, very old portfolio website I've created in, I think, 2014, like 10 years ago, still up. And I'm just thinking right now, what the hell was I thinking? Right? So, I mean, the font size, the colors, it's better than the things that I've done before that. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't do that now in the way that I've done it back then. Um,
Yeah. And
I
then
don't want
sorry
to
for
show it because,
yeah, no,
um,
we'll save you that embarrassment
yeah,
for sure. Um, uh,
that's
and
interesting.
no, I didn't even know that, but that makes so much sense. I knew there was a problem in
Hmm.
trying to apply print guidelines to digital spaces
Yeah,
for lots of different reasons, but I did not know about that 12-point font in Word
yeah,
being different. But that makes a ton of sense why they would stand so pat, like until you show
yeah,
it. Like, look, this is
yeah.
14, right? Because usually when they do that, they're using some kind of other font checker and it
Hmm.
says, oh, it's in 16. Oh, it's supposed to be in 14. Like,
Yeah.
and that's where when you have, oh man,
I mean,
again, this is why
uh,
you get professionals involved, right?
so I mean, if you just Google for things like PT to pixels, you will land on something like this. So again, just PT to pixel. and then you just click through any of the result, and then you will see a whole table with conversion and even with math formulas how to calculate it and
Oh
a
my
lot of other
gosh.
things. But again, 12 pixels equal, or 12 points equal 16 pixels,
Oh man. God,
right?
knowing this would have helped me immensely back in 21.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, I remember a client many years ago, and she was like, "Yeah, here's the PDF for the email, just rebuild it in HubSpot." And I was like, "Okay, but I need these spacings and all the information in pixels." Yeah, but when I was working at a design agency, we worked with millimeters. And I was like, yeah, but the web
Millimeters.
is not in millimeters. I mean, technically you could code it in millimeters, but you won't have a great time with that. Yeah, but just, can't you just convert it? And I was like, technically I can, but then I won't be responsible for anything, right? So I need all the spacings, all the sizes, everything in pixels or a web format. Yeah, okay, thank you. Right? And again,
Yep.
this is something that people have hard times with, especially since modern websites, I would say, are not based on pixels anymore. Because nowadays we are working with so-called REMs and EMs, so like flexible sizes, and there's a different conversion rate. So, for instance, by default, a developer can change that, but by default, every browser will uh, understand that if you are putting one RAM in your code, it will be 16 pixels. So one RAM is 16. And then you can go from there like zero point 0.5, 1.5, 1.125, like you can
Yeah.
calculate everything based on a 16 pixels grid or 2 pixel grid, so to
Right.
say. And
Yeah. Basically 1/16, 2/16, 3/16.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Oh
this
man.
is basically what everything is evolving to,
Yeah.
right? Because
I
pixels,
love.
there are things um, that might be responsible for quite a hard time for a developer, especially for responsive and mobile first, like all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Man, I love
points to
learning new
pixels.
stuff. I love learning new stuff from you every week,
Yeah,
Anton.
thank you.
This has been awesome. Um,
Yeah,
Again, I think the key is understand, the regulation that we were talking about.
yeah,
It always helps to understand why. Don't just like look
hmm
at it as another thing you got to just check all the boxes on. Like there's reasons for a lot of these things. And if you understand why, you should be like, okay, yeah, I'm looking forward to adjusting my website, updating the website, redesigning the website to follow these guidelines because it's going to be a better customer experience, a better user experience.
yeah,
So thank you for taking us through this today. Um, as you as you take a think about that, like about your website, um, about maybe the color schemes, the fonts. Uh, this is where like digital first design starts to come into
hmm
play. Like where are we talking about guidelines,
yeah,
right? Think about those opportunities and let's grow. Have a great day,
yeah.
everybody.
Have a great one.